Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Jessie J, titled Sweet Talker. But first, this critic would like to begin this review with an acknowledgement that, yes, he misinterpreted the song I Miss Her on Jessie J's last record, Alive, when he reviewed it. It is not a song about a troubled same-sex relationship, but instead was about a family member suffering from a mental illness similar to dementia. No, he does not have the slightest idea how he could have possibly messed that up, and he is very grateful to the many comments that felt the need to correct him on it. Now back to our regularly scheduled review. Please enjoy it. You know, I honestly wish Jessie J was a lot more famous than she is, at least on this side of the Atlantic. By now she's built up a pretty impressive stable of hit singles, most of which I've liked, and yet there's a considerable number of music critics, hell the audience in general, who'd probably brand her as a Katy Perry wannabe, especially early on in her career. And to me it's always been very interesting to watch their careers in parallel on the changing landscape of the pop charts. Because let's be blunt here, as the charts have shifted more towards R&B than pop, it's not exactly been a great year for Katy Perry, with Dark Horse, her worst single by a mile from Prism, being the best performer, mostly thanks to crossover airplay thanks to Jessie J's awful guest verse. Because in comparison with the arsenal singles from Teenage Dream, Unconditionally, Birthday, and This Is How We Do have not exactly been smash hits, both critically or commercially. But if anything, Jessie J has fared even worse. I thought Alive was a pretty decent album when I reviewed it last year, with good songwriting and performances, but hampered by a lack of focus on instrumentation and production, and some really sloppy guest appearances. But I'll be blunt, that record did nothing in North America, with most of the singles and chart success coming out of the UK and Europe. And there's a reason for that, as the American version of the album was never released. Instead, a new album of material was thrown together in record time for this year, featuring Jessie J's least number of writing credits to date. Now, for me, that was grounds for a lot of concern. Jessie J's songwriting was one of the things I liked most about Alive, and to see even more hands in the process for her new album Sweet Talker was not exactly encouraging. But considering the shared opening single Bang Bang with Ariana Grande has proven to be one of the strongest pop singles of the year, probably one of the best songs of Jessie J's career, I figured the album couldn't be that bad, right? Well, here's the thing. Sweet Talker by Jessie J could have been a lot worse, but it should have been a lot better. It's a record from top to bottom that feels rushed out to keep Jessie J in the spotlight right now by her label. From putting Bang Bang on this record, even though it was originally on Ariana Grande's album My Everything, to the fact that over 50 songwriters worked on this thing. And the crazy thing is that while there are some small improvements, the vast majority of this album is overshadowed by problems that were present on Alive and yet haven't gotten fixed. If anything, they've gotten worse. So, okay, let's start with where I began last time, the lyrics. Now, I've gone on record saying that I like Jessie J's songwriting, and that she has a certain brand of raw sensuality that drives her writing that might lack some subtlety, but has a certain brazen appeal that can work with her vocal delivery. That's why I had a certain amount of trepidation for seeing that she only has 5 writing credits on the standard edition of this album. And you can definitely tell, because the songwriting lacks a fair amount of flavor or interesting subject matter, at least for me. Now, sure, I appreciate the confrontational attitude of Sweet Talker that shows her taking the power back on a one-night stand. I like that Fire had the nuance to show the full impact of a relationship flaming out in record time, and I dug how Masterpiece had a pretty solid lyrical cadence that backed up Jessie J as an artist asserting herself, even though she didn't write that song. But most of the tracks on this album, they don't stray far away from traditional R&B topics and don't do a lot to innovate beyond that. Hookups, troubled relationships, and even a few songs that seem to be trying to confront Jessie J's issues with critics that honestly feel a little clumsy. Part of this is the technical songwriting, and look, it feels rushed. Words are repeated or stuttered to fill up space on choruses. The metaphors are incredibly overused. And when the guest verse bringing variety to this album is coming from 2 Chainz, look, you got big problems. Now, granted, I get why some songwriters might have difficulty writing for Jessie J, because as a vocalist, she can have a bad tendency to over-emote and oversell lyrics. And this is coming from someone who genuinely likes her vocal delivery. But at the same time, outside of a few isolated incidents like the odd warble on Ain't Been Done that reminded me of Kimbra of all people, Jessie J has grown and improved as a vocalist. She still has moments where she gets pitchy instead of sounding raw, but she's got a lot more control and a lot more subtlety, and she's not afraid to show off her potent range, which I did appreciate. And probably the biggest point in her favor is that she works her ass ass off to sell these songs. And this can add some real drama to the tracks, a real desperate flavor that the songwriting can't always support. And I just wish that she had managed to get somebody who could have produced for her voice instead of producing around it or over top of it. Because we now run to the elephant of the room, the production and instrumentation. Now, let me stress that with Jessie J's voice, I can see her working reasonably well over the heavier, percussion-heavy beats. And there's definitely a lot more melody and broader instrumentation than I would expect in a traditional pop album this year. Most of the rock elements that cropped up on Alive are completely gone, replaced by more classical instrumentation and strings, which were a welcome addition to songs like Fire and Masterpiece. But for every good moment like those, you get the klaxon-like synth and heavy percussion on Ain't Been Done that completely does not fit with the chorus, or the guitar-driven crescendo on Burnin' Up that transitions into this weedy little hand-clap-supported vocal melody that's way too weak and quiet to support that song. And those are the most egregious examples. I like the scratchy guitar and production on Personal. It was backed with piano, but then you get a rush of looped, pitch-shifted gang vocals and a thick beat that completely overtakes any melody. Or take Seal Me With a Kiss, a song that feels like it's a modern recreation of a stiff late 80s R&B jam with a really blaring high synth line and De La Soul delivering a verse that they could have dropped in their sleep. It doesn't help matters that Keep Us Together comes in a couple songs later and does pretty much the exact same vibe with a more prominent piano line. Honestly, it sounds a lot better, which makes the Seal Me With a Kiss sound redundant. Now granted, Keep Us Together is a pretty simple song, but it's one of the better tracks on the album. It doesn't have to be that complicated to work. But the biggest problem on this album is the production, because you're looking for an area that feels the most rushed, it's here. Because at best it's inconsistent, and at worst it's outright crap. The auto-tune and pitch correction feels plastered on. It only seems to highlight Jessie J's weaker moments vocally instead of deftly concealing them. The mixes are completely inconsistent when it comes to maintaining any sort of depth or real texture, most of which is not helped by the inclusion of so much extraneous sound that prevents some arguably simple songs from breathing and growing, which shows an odd lack of confidence in the tracks to stand on their own. The most offensive example, however, is Loud, a song that completely wastes Lindsey Sterling's great violin work by shoving her to the back of the mix. And when you do hear her, there's no depth to her violin production whatsoever, and it sounds painfully thin, which is kind of bizarre considering how good the strings sounded on Fire and Masterpiece, until you realize there was not a single common producer amongst those three songs. And that's indicative of the larger problem with this album. Despite Jessie J trying so damn hard to get this album real emotional weight, the production pretty much completely neuters it. In other words, I don't blame Jessie J for why this album is only decent at best. You know what, I don't understand why they didn't just take Alive, add a few extra songs, let's take Bang Bang, Keep Us Together, Fire, and Masterpiece, and give it a full US release and a re-release worldwide. Hell, Katy Perry did it with Teenage Dream. There's precedent here. As it is, Sweet Talker by Jessie J feels rushed, haphazard, and only held together by the fact that Jessie J is a legitimately strong performer that I really do like. But as it is, I feel this record is a very light 6 out of 10, and that's being generous. Fans of Jessie J, you'll probably like this. I kinda did, but you'll like it for her, not anything else. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. You'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's anything else that you guys thought about this album that I might have missed, or there's any other albums coming out that you want me to talk about, leave them in the comments. I'd be happy to take a look. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.